My husband invited his entire family to watch as he presented me with divorce papers on my birthday. Surprise! I'm leaving you for someone who isn't a disappointment. His mother laughed. We never thought he'd actually marry someone so beneath him. They had champagne ready to celebrate my devastation. I smiled, calmly signed the papers and left. Today, exactly 6 months later, he was sleeping in his car outside my house, begging to talk. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. It's funny, looking back. You never see the tidal wave when you're just watching the tide go out. For the longest time, I just felt the water receding from my feet, leaving the sand cold and bare. The last year of my marriage to Preston was exactly like that. We'd been married for 6 years, and the silence in our house had become louder than any argument we ever had. It wasn't a hostile silence, not at first. It was a cold, heavy silence, the kind that seeps into the drywall and settles in your bones. The kind that makes you forget what the warmth of real connection feels like. We met in college. It feels like a lifetime ago. I was the scholarship kid, juggling 3 part-time jobs, serving breakfast at a diner at dawn, shelving books in the library between classes, and slinging beers at a campus bar at night. My life was a frantic effort just to keep my head above water, fueled by instant noodles and a stubborn refusal to fail. He was Preston, a business major from a family whose name was etched in granite on the front of the business school itself. It was a classic, storybook romance, the kind you see in old movies. The working-class girl and the boy from the right side of the tracks. But in real life, the story doesn't end when the credits roll. In real life, after the storybook wedding, you have to meet the family. Over and over again. And his family, especially his mother, Matilda, never let me forget for a single second that I was an outsider who had somehow slipped past the gate. Matilda was a woman who seemed to be carved from ice and ambition, with a smile that was a masterpiece of facial engineering. It curved her lips but never touched the cold, calculating light in her eyes. To her, I wasn't a daughter-in-law, I was a curiosity, a strange project her son had inexplicably taken on. I remember one Sunday dinner, about a year into our marriage. It was a perfect encapsulation of my life with them. We were in their cavernous dining room, the table a sea of polished mahogany so shiny you could see your own stressed-out reflection in it. The air was thick with the scent of roasted rosemary and unspoken judgment. Matilda, at the head of the table, was holding court. "We heard from the Bensingers today," she announced, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "Their son, the one who just made partner at that big law firm, is getting a huge inheritance from his grandmother. They're buying a summer home in the Hamptons." She looked around the table, then her eyes landed on me. "Beverly, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How is that little furniture hobby of yours going? Are you still finding those dusty old things at garage sales?" The table went quiet. All eyes were on me. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. My hobby was a small but growing business. I poured my heart into finding old, forgotten pieces of furniture and giving them a new life. It was my passion, and I was good at it. "It's going well, thank you, Matilda," I said, my voice steady. "I just finished a commission for a client downtown. A beautiful mid-century dresser." She gave me that icy smile. "Oh, that's lovely, dear. It's so important to have a little something to keep you busy." The implication was clear, it was cute, but it wasn't a real career. It wasn't a promotion, it wasn't a partnership, it wasn't a summer home in the Hamptons. Preston, sitting next to me, just shifted in his chair and took a sip of his wine. In the beginning, he used to defend me. He'd say, "Mom, Bev is really talented. You should see what she can do." But the constant, subtle erosion from his mother had worn him down. Now, he just stayed silent. His silence was a betrayal that cut deeper than any of her words. The last few months were the worst. the silence at home became a chasm. He was perpetually attached to his phone, a strange, secretive half-smile playing on his lips as he texted. He started working late, coming home long after I'd gone to bed, smelling of an expensive cologne I knew wasn't his. When I asked about his day, I'd get a one-word answer, fine. One evening, I tried to break through. I made his favorite meal, braised short ribs, a dish that took hours. I set the table, lit candles. I wanted to pretend we were still the couple who fell in love in college. He came home at 9 p.m., saw the table, and said, "Oh, I already ate." Had to take a client out. He sat on the couch, pulled out his phone, and the silence descended again, broken only by the quiet tapping of his thumbs on the screen. I wasn't an idiot. I knew something was fundamentally broken. But I was a fixer. It's what I do. I fix broken things. I thought if I just worked harder, if I was just a little more patient, a little more perfect, maybe I could fix us. Maybe I could sand down the rough edges and apply a new coat of varnish and make our marriage beautiful again. I was so wrong. The week before my 34th birthday, Preston's mood did a complete 180. The sullen, distant man was replaced by someone I barely recognized. He was attentive, almost buzzing with a strange, manic energy. "Bev," he said one evening, actually putting his phone down and looking at me. "I'm planning something special for your birthday. Something truly special. Something you'll never forget." A tiny, foolish flicker of hope ignited in my chest. It was pathetic, I know, but it was there. After months of cold shoulders and silence, this felt like a ray of sunshine. Maybe this was it. The grand gesture. The turning point. The proof that he was still in there, that we were still in there. "Oh," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "That's sweet of you. What are you planning?" He just gave me this wide, knowing smirk. "It's a surprise, babe. The best kind. Just be ready Saturday at 7 p.m. sharp. And wear that blue dress I like." Then he dropped the other shoe. "We're going to my mother's house for it." The flicker of hope died, replaced by a cold dread. The alarm bells weren't just ringing in my head, they were clanging. My birthday? At Matilda's? The last place on earth I'd ever want to celebrate anything. Her home was my personal hell, a museum of my failures where I was the one exhibit that didn't belong. "Your mom's?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "Preston, why there? You know how she is." "She's helping me with the surprise," he said smoothly, his smile not wavering for a second. He took my hands. His were cold. "Trust me, Bev. This is a new beginning for us. I promise." Against every screaming instinct in my body, I chose to believe him. Or rather, I chose to want to believe him. For the rest of that week, I lived in a state of willful delusion. I told myself this was his way of finally bridging the gap between me and his family. I imagined a surprise party with our actual friends, not just his parents' business associates. I let myself dream that maybe he'd finally saved up for that trip to Italy we'd talked about in our first year of marriage. On Saturday, I spent hours getting ready. I did my hair, my makeup, and put on the blue dress he liked. As I stood in front of the mirror, I saw a woman who looked tired, a woman with shadows of doubt in her eyes, but a woman who was still trying. For that woman, I plastered on a hopeful smile and walked out the door. The drive over was 20 minutes of pure anxiety. I had a rock in the pit of my stomach. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting my history with Matilda poison a potentially wonderful evening. When I pulled into the long, winding driveway, I saw the house was ablaze with lights, and the driveway was lined with expensive cars, BMWs, Mercedes, a Porsche. My little 10-year-old sedan looked like a dinghy that had drifted into a yacht club. I took a deep, shaky breath, smoothed down my dress for the 10th time, and walked to the massive, imposing front door. Preston opened it before I could even ring the bell, as if he'd been waiting right behind it. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit, a wide, plastic smile stretched across his face. "There's the birthday girl," he said, his voice booming with forced cheer. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. It felt like ice. He guided me by the elbow into the living room, and that's when the rock in my stomach turned into a ball of ice. The room was full of people. His mother, Matilda, stood front and center, holding a flute of champagne, looking like a queen surveying her court. His father, his sister, his cousins, a handful of his parents' oldest friends, they were all there. And every single one of them was holding a champagne glass. But no one was talking. No one was smiling. They were just watching me. The silence was thick, heavy, suffocating. This wasn't the happy, buzzing silence before a shout of surprise. This was the cold, predatory silence of a pack of wolves that had just cornered its prey. "Beverly," Preston said, his voice echoing in the dead quiet of the room. "We have something special for your birthday." From the corner of my eye, I saw his mother, Matilda, actually snicker. It wasn't a laugh. It was a quiet, cruel, dismissive little sound that cut right through me. My mind was scrambling, desperately trying to make sense of the scene. A car? A trip? What kind of gift requires a silent, champagne-wielding firing squad? Preston stepped back, a theatrical flourish, and pulled a thick manila envelope from behind his back. For one last, insane split second, my hopeful brain screamed, "Plane tickets. It's plane tickets to Italy!" Then he held it out to me. And with that same wide, empty smile, he spoke the 11 words that would detonate my entire world. "Surprise," he said, his voice clear and bright. "I'm leaving you for someone who isn't a disappointment." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete that I could hear the blood roaring in my own ears. My brain felt like it had been unplugged. The words floated in the air, nonsensical, alien. Disappointment? Leaving me? Here? Now? It was a scene of such surreal cruelty that I couldn't process it as reality. Then, a sound shattered the silence. Matilda started laughing. It wasn't a little snicker this time. It was a full, triumphant, braying laugh. It was the most hideous sound I had ever heard. "We never thought he'd actually marry someone so beneath him," she announced to the room, raising her glass as if giving a toast. Thank God he finally came to his senses and corrected his mistake. My gaze, which had been frozen on Preston, snapped to her smug, hateful face, and then back to my husband. He was just standing there, holding out the envelope, his smile finally faltering as he saw the utter blank shock on my face. It seemed I wasn't reacting according to his script. He impatiently shoved the envelope into my hands. My fingers were so numb, I almost dropped it. It was thick and heavy. They were divorce papers. Already filled out. With neat little tabs indicating where I needed to sign. As if on cue, one of Preston's cousins, a smirking man named Derek, theatrically popped the cork on a fresh bottle of champagne. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room, making me flinch. They had planned this. Every last detail. They had gathered their family and friends, armed themselves with chilled champagne, and orchestrated this entire night as a victory party. A party to celebrate my public execution. I don't know what they expected. Maybe they wanted a scene. Maybe they were hoping I would scream, or collapse into tears, or fall to my knees and beg him not to leave. For a brief, terrifying moment, I think my body wanted to. I felt a tremor start in my hands, a hot, prickly pressure building behind my eyes. The wound was so fresh, so shocking, that my system was about to go into shock. But then, as I looked around that room, at each of their smug, expectant, predatory faces, something inside me snapped. It didn't break. It didn't shatter. It snapped into place, like a dislocated bone being reset. The shock and the pain were so immense, so all-consuming, that they just cancelled each other out, leaving behind a strange, cold, crystalline clarity. It was like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. I looked at Preston, at the man I had loved, the man I had spent years trying to please, the man I had built a life with, and I felt nothing. The love was gone. The hurt was buried under a glacier of ice. All that was left was a vast, quiet, empty void. I lowered the papers and looked him straight in the eye. "Do you have a pen?" I asked. My voice was calm. Eerily calm. It sliced through the tension in the room like a surgeon's scalpel. It wasn't the reaction anyone in that room wanted, and the confusion was immediate. Preston's smile vanished completely, replaced by a flicker of irritation. Matilda stopped laughing and just stared at me, her brow furrowed in a frown of disapproval. I was ruining her big moment. Preston's father, a man who had never spoken more than 10 words to me in 6 years, stepped forward and silently handed me his own pen. It was a fancy, heavy, gold-nibbed thing. A Mont Blanc. Of course it was. The pen probably cost more than my first car. I took the pen, walked over to their pristine white marble countertop, the one Matilda always bragged was imported directly from Carrara, Italy, and I spread the papers out. The crisp legal sheets looked obscene on that perfect, sterile surface. And without saying another word, I began to sign. I signed every single line that required my name, my hand steady, my signature clean and decisive. The only sound in that cavernous, silent room was the whispery scratch of the expensive pen on the cheap paper and someone, I think it was Preston's sister, awkwardly clearing their throat. No one moved. No one spoke. They just watched me, their twisted celebration deflating into a confused, awkward tableau. They had prepared for hysterics, not for quiet efficiency. When I finished the last signature, I clicked the cap back on the pen. I walked back over to Preston and placed the pen neatly back in his father's still outstretched hand. Then I looked directly at my husband, my now, for all intents and purposes, ex-husband. "Thanks for the birthday gift," I said, my voice still perfectly level, almost conversational. "Best one I've ever received." And then I turned my back on all of them and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't curse them out. I just left. I walked calmly out of that house, down the stone pathway, leaving them standing there in their party clothes, holding their celebratory champagne, their faces a perfect picture of bewildered, frustrated confusion. Seeing the shock on their faces when I didn't give them the drama they so desperately craved, that was the first tiny taste of victory in a war I didn't even know I was about to fight. I got in my car and just drove. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I had to be in motion. The calm, icy composure I'd maintained inside that house was a fragile shell, and I could feel it starting to crack. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep them on the steering wheel. I fumbled with the radio, desperate for a distraction, but every song that came on, a love song, a breakup song, an upbeat pop song, felt like a personal, vicious mockery. I turned it off and drove in silence. The city lights blurred past my window, a watercolor of someone else's happy, normal life. I ended up, somehow, in a part of town I rarely visited. I saw the flickering neon sign of a place called the Lamplighter. It was a crappy little dive bar, the kind of place with peeling vinyl on the stools and the comforting smell of stale beer and regret. It was perfect. It was a place where no one would know my name. I sat at the sticky bar and ordered a whiskey, neat. The bartender, a grizzled man with a kind face, just nodded and poured. I took a long, burning sip. The numbness from the house was wearing off, and the pain was starting to seep in, hot and sharp. It was a raw, physical pain, a gaping wound in my chest where my heart used to be. I pulled out my phone. It was already lighting up. Texts from Preston. The first one read, "Why didn't you say anything?" I stared at it, the sheer audacity of the question making me dizzy. I was supposed to say something? What? Was I supposed to argue my case in front of his cackling mother? The second one, "Are you seriously not going to fight for us?" Fight for us? The hypocrisy was so staggering it was almost breathtaking. He orchestrates a public execution, a ritualistic shaming, and then has the nerve to get angry that I didn't fight for the privilege of staying with my executioner. I signaled to the bartender for another whiskey. The third one, "You're just proving my point by running away." That was the one that did it. That was the one that broke through the grief and hit the bedrock of fury beneath. I took another long drink of whiskey, and as the warmth spread through my chest, something changed. The raw, hot pain began to cool and solidify. The grief began to recede, and something else took its place. It was a cold, hard, diamond-sharp rage. It wasn't the explosive kind of anger that makes you want to scream and break things. It was a calculating, methodical anger. The quiet, focused kind that makes you want to burn someone's world to the ground, not with a bomb, but with a magnifying glass in the sun, piece by piece, and watch them choke on the ashes. See, what Preston and his Ice Queen mother didn't know, what they had never bothered to learn in the 6 years they'd tolerated my presence, was that I am not weak. I am quiet, but I am not weak. And for 6 years, I had been a silent witness in their opulent, unhappy house. I was the furniture they talked in front of, the ghost they ignored at parties. And when people think you're nothing, they let you see everything. I knew things. I knew about the creative bookkeeping Matilda's accountant, who drank too much at the company Christmas party, had bragged about. I knew about Preston's cousin who was sleeping with her sister's husband. I knew about his father's business trips to Vegas that never seemed to involve any actual business. For 6 years, they had treated me like dirt under their manicured fingernails. And now, they had handed me a shovel. Sitting there in that dark, smoky bar, surrounded by strangers, I pulled out my phone. The screen was still lit up with Preston's name. I silenced it, opened my notes app, and I did 3 things. First, I typed the name Reggie. Reggie wasn't just a lawyer, she was a legend. My friend Sarah's older sister had used her in a nasty divorce, and the stories she told were terrifying and brilliant. Reggie was known for taking no prisoners. She was a shark. I knew I needed a shark, not a goldfish. Second, I opened up the shared cloud account Preston and I used for photos and documents. I started screenshotting everything. Every suspicious email receipt, every odd text message thread that had been backed up from his phone to the cloud. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but my gut told me to dig. To preserve everything before he thought to delete it. Third, I made a list. A list of every business contact, every family friend, every social acquaintance who needed to hear my side of the story before Matilda and Preston could spin their web of elegant, believable lies. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. The thought of sleeping in the bed I had shared with him, the bed he had probably left that morning to go plan my demise, made my skin crawl. I called my oldest friend, Sarah, the one Preston always called a bad influence because she wasn't impressed by his family's money and had once told him his tie was ugly. I showed up on her doorstep at 1 a.m., looking like a ghost. She just opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug without asking a single question. I crashed on her couch and woke up the next morning to my phone vibrating itself off the coffee table. It was a storm of texts and missed calls from Preston, his tone shifting from smug, to confused, to genuinely panicked. Apparently, he had genuinely expected me to come crawling back, begging him to work things out. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He was about to find out. By noon the next day, while Preston was probably at a boozy brunch with his mother, recounting my pathetic and confusing exit, my counterattack was already in motion. The first thing I did was call Reggie. Her voice on the phone was exactly what I needed, sharp, no nonsense, and utterly devoid of pity. "Okay, Beverly," she said after I had recounted the entire story, from the years of quiet insults at Sunday dinners to the birthday party ambush. There was a long, charged pause. I held my breath. "Beverly," she finally said, her voice dripping with a kind of predatory glee that sent a shiver down my spine, "we are going to financially dismantle these people. We will not leave them with enough money to buy one of their precious little cocktail napkins." I had found my shark. Before I had even finished my first cup of coffee at Sarah's apartment, Reggie had already filed the initial counterpaperwork. Her first move was to get an emergency order freezing our joint assets. Preston and Matilda had assumed they could bleed the accounts dry before I could react. They were wrong. My next step was to secure my own life, what little of it was truly mine. I drove to the bank and withdrew exactly half of the money from our joint savings account, not a penny more. I'm not a thief. I'm a fighter. I left his half untouched, a silent testament to the fact that this wasn't about greed, it was about justice. Then, I rented a 10 by 10 storage unit. And then came the hardest part, I went back to the apartment. Walking into that space we had shared for 6 years was like walking into a tomb. Every object held a memory, and now they were all tainted. The couch where we used to watch movies was just a piece of furniture. The dining table where I tried to have candlelit dinners was just a slab of wood. I worked with a grim, methodical efficiency, refusing to let myself break down. I packed my clothes, my books, my personal documents. And then I went to the small spare room I had used as my workshop. I carefully wrapped and packed all of my tools, my paints, my supplies. I took the pieces I had lovingly restored, the ones he had called tacky garage sale rejects. As I loaded the last box, a beautiful, hand-painted rocking chair, into my car, I felt a strange sense of lightness. I wasn't just moving boxes. I was cutting the dead weight from my life. I was just leaving when my phone rang. It was Preston. I ignored it. A text immediately followed. "Where are you?" I went to the bank. "The account is frozen." "What did you do?" I almost laughed. "What did I do?" Another text. "We need to talk about this. You're being irrational." And then the one that sealed his fate in my mind. This isn't how this was supposed to go. I sat in my car, surrounded by the boxes that represented my broken life, and I typed back my first and only response to him. "No kidding, Preston. This isn't how any of this was supposed to go." Reggie called me later that day. "Okay, so here's where we stand," she said, "all business. The fact that you have no children is a huge advantage. No messy custody battle. Your name is on the deed to the apartment and on most of your joint investment accounts." His little theatrical performance was designed to humiliate you into signing away your rights without a fight. It was a massive, arrogant miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with a mouse, but they just kicked a hornet's nest. The rage was still there, a constant, low burn in the pit of my stomach. But it was focused now. It was fuel. For years, his family thought I was nothing. They had celebrated the end of my marriage like it was a national holiday. They had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. The next 3 months were a blur of legal paperwork and the slow, painful, awkward process of building a new life from scratch. I was staying on Sarah's couch, and while I was grateful, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. The first big break in the case came from a place I never expected. It was late one night, I couldn't sleep, and I was going through our shared cloud storage account one last time, trying to download old photos of my family, of my deceased parents, before Preston's lawyer inevitably cut off my access. I was scrolling through endless folders of vacation photos and holiday pictures when I stumbled across a folder I'd never seen before. It was labeled, simply, Work Presentation. My heart started to pound. It had been created about 9 months ago, right around the time Preston started becoming distant and secretive. My gut clenched. Being the suspicious, jaded person I had now become, I clicked on it. It wasn't a work presentation. My blood ran cold. It was hundreds, literally hundreds, of screenshots of text message conversations between Preston and a coworker of his named Caleb. The texts went back 8 months. 8 months of secret lunches that turned into secret dinners. 8 months of late-night calls and clandestine hotel meetings. There were sickeningly sweet pet names. There were explicit promises about our future, or rather, their future, a future built on the ashes of mine. There were enough heart and kissy face emojis to make a teenager blush. Pro tip for anyone out there thinking of cheating: maybe don't meticulously document your entire affair and then save the evidence to a shared cloud account your spouse has full access to. Just a thought. There were selfies of them together, grinning like fools. At a cozy-looking bar he told me was a client dinner. In a hotel room with a view of the Chicago skyline, a room that looked suspiciously like the one from his boring business conference he'd gone to a few months back. It turned out he wasn't analyzing quarterly reports at 10 p.m. on a Thursday night. The pain was sharp and sickening, a fresh stab to an already gaping wound. But it was quickly overshadowed by a cold, hard sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. My gut had been right all along. My hands were shaking as I downloaded the entire folder, saved it to a thumb drive, and then emailed it to Reggie with the subject line, "I think you'll find this useful." Her only reply was a text that came 5 minutes later: "Christmas came early this year." The woman was a savage, and I was so glad she was on my side. That discovery, as painful as it was, became a turning point. It solidified 3 decisions for me. 1. I was going to focus on getting my own life together, not just on revenge. Revenge was a snack, but a well-lived life was the whole damn meal. 2. I was going to let Reggie handle every single interaction with Preston and his family. I was done speaking to them directly. From now on, they could talk to my shark. 3. I was going to start building a life so good, so happy, so authentically mine, that the memory of what he threw away would haunt him for the rest of his miserable life. The apartment we had shared held too many ghosts. I couldn't afford much, but I found a small, 1-bedroom, month-to-month rental in a part of town I'd always liked. It was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building, and it was nothing fancy, but it had good light and a tiny little balcony that faced west. The first night there, I didn't have any furniture except an air mattress. I ordered a pizza, sat on the floor, and ate it out of the box. Afterward, I took a cheap beer out onto that little balcony and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. And I realized I hadn't felt that kind of profound, quiet peace in years. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was finally, utterly free. I started hitting the gym. Not to get a revenge body, though I won't lie, the thought of looking amazing the next time I ran into him was a pretty good motivator. I just needed somewhere to put all this furious energy, to channel the anger into something other than wanting to keep Preston's precious Audi. The first week was hell. I was weak, I was clumsy, I felt like everyone was staring at me. But I kept going back. And slowly, I started to get stronger. I could lift a little more weight. I could run a little longer on the treadmill. It was empowering, feeling my body respond, feeling myself get physically and mentally tougher with every single workout. And I threw myself headfirst into my furniture business. The little hobby Matilda so despised. I turned my spare bedroom into a workshop. I spent my nights and weekends hunting for treasures at flea markets and estate sales. I'd haul them back to my little apartment, and with music blasting, I would sand, and paint, and stain, and restore these old, forgotten pieces of furniture. I found joy in the work. I found peace in the focus. I built a proper website, taught myself about marketing on social media. And slowly, amazingly, people responded. My little Etsy shop started getting more orders than I could handle. I made my first $1,000 sale on a set of beautifully restored dining chairs, and that feeling, the pride, the validation, was better than any compliment Preston had ever given me. The divorce proceedings were interesting. Preston and his mother, still blissfully unaware of the folder of evidence I possessed, apparently expected me to roll over. Their first offer was so insultingly low it was laughable. They wanted me to walk away with almost nothing, clearly assuming I was desperate and broken. Reggie actually cackled like a witch over a cauldron when she read their offer. "Oh, these people are delightful," she said. Then she sent their lawyer a single, password-protected file. The file was named Work Presentation. The affair evidence was our nuclear option. Matilda had spent decades carefully curating a public image as a pillar of the community, a champion of family values and business integrity. The threat of her precious son's sordid, well-documented affair becoming public record in a messy, protracted divorce trial made them suddenly very cooperative. Their next settlement offer was significantly more generous. One afternoon, I had to go back to the old apartment one last time to get a few sentimental things I'd forgotten. I thought Preston would be at work, but he showed up unexpectedly. It was the first time I'd seen him face to face since the birthday ambush. He looked different. His usually perfect hair was a mess, and he was wearing sweatpants, which in the 6 years I'd known him, I'd never seen him do. He launched into this whole, rambling speech about how he'd made a terrible mistake, how Caleb wasn't who he thought he was, how maybe we could talk about reconciliation. I just stared at him, my face a blank mask. He had to be joking. I picked up my last box of things, a box filled with old photo albums of my parents. I walked right past him towards the door. "If you have anything to discuss, Preston," I said, my voice cold and flat, "have your attorney contact mine." The look on his face, the genuine, uncomprehending shock that I wasn't falling to my knees with tears of gratitude for this magnificent second chance, was honestly priceless. Things started to move quickly after that. With the affair evidence hanging over their heads like the sword of Damocles, the Preston family empire suddenly lost its appetite for a fight. The divorce was finalized in record time. Thanks to Reggie's brilliant and ruthless negotiating, there was no alimony for him to contest. We sold the apartment, and we split the proceeds, 50-50ths. I let him keep most of the furniture. I wanted a fresh start, untainted by the past. Life began to settle into a new, happier rhythm. I reconnected with old friends, like Sarah, the ones Preston had systematically pushed away because they weren't wealthy or well-connected enough for his family. It was like finding parts of myself I thought I had lost forever. My furniture business was no longer a hobby, it was becoming a real, viable career. I wasn't getting rich, my salary was nothing compared to what Preston made, but I was paying my own bills with money I earned doing something I loved. And that feeling of independence, of self-reliance, felt like the greatest wealth in the world. Then, the universe decided to serve up a little dish of karmic justice. I had lunch one day with an old college roommate, Mark, who I hadn't seen in years. He'd moved back to the city, and we were just catching up on the last decade. He mentioned he was now working in investment banking, high up at a huge, powerful firm. As he talked about his work, I realized it was the same firm that was the main investor in Matilda's big new commercial real estate project, a massive development she had been bragging about for over a year. I didn't say a word about my divorce or what had happened. It wasn't the time or the place. I just listened, asked questions about his life, and we had a wonderful, normal lunch. Afterward, he sent me a connection request on LinkedIn. I accepted it. That was all. A simple, innocent, digital handshake. 2 weeks later, I was scrolling through the local business journal online when a headline made me stop breathing. The main investor had unexpectedly and very publicly pulled out of Matilda's flagship project, citing concerns about the project's leadership and a lack of confidence in its internal stability. The project was now on the verge of collapse. I can't say for sure that my innocent LinkedIn connection with Mark had anything to do with it. But, the timing was certainly interesting. A few days after that, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe right. It was Arthur, Preston's younger brother. He was always the only decent one in that family, a quiet, gentle soul who was often steamrolled by the massive egos of his mother and older brother. "Beverly," he said, his voice hesitant and kind. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I just wanted to, I wanted to apologize. For what they did. It was monstrous. And I wanted to see how you are. We talked for a few minutes, the first civil conversation I'd had with anyone from that family in months. And then he dropped the bomb. Preston was a complete wreck. Apparently, Caleb, the coworker, had dumped him. It turned out Caleb was only interested in Preston for his family connections and the potential for a promotion through Matilda. The second the big real estate deal started to look shaky, Caleb was gone. Preston's perfect life, the one he had thrown mine away for, was starting to crumble. His Instagram, once a daily showcase of his #blessed life full of fancy dinners and exotic trips, had gone completely silent. Meanwhile, I started posting a little on my own business account. Nothing flashy. Just pictures of my hiking trips with Sarah, my latest furniture projects, a night out at a local music festival. Just me, living a normal, happy, and productive life. One night, at 2 a.m., Preston's best friend accidentally liked a photo of me standing proudly next to a beautifully restored armoire, then quickly unliked it a second later. I smiled. I knew they were watching. Last night would have been our 7th wedding anniversary. I'd thought about it earlier in the day, but it was a fleeting thought, like noticing a scar that doesn't hurt anymore. I was sitting on my little balcony, a glass of wine in my hand, scrolling through my phone, feeling okay. Not sad, not angry. Just peaceful. The city lights twinkled below, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then my phone lit up with a text from an unsaved number. My heart gave a little jolt. I knew who it was. I know you probably hate me, but I can't stop thinking about where we would be tonight if I hadn't ruined everything. I miss your terrible jokes and the way you always made coffee for both of us in the morning, even when we were fighting. The apartment feels so empty now. Caleb was a mistake. My family was wrong. I was wrong. Please, can we just talk? I'm not above begging at this point. I stared at that text for a full hour, the wine in my glass forgotten. 6 months ago, I would have given my right arm to receive a message like that. I would have seen it as a lifeline, a validation, a chance to fix the broken thing. Now, I didn't know what I felt. It was like looking at a letter from a stranger. I typed and deleted about 15 different responses. A polite but firm no, thank you. A furious, all caps how dare you. A single, dismissive question mark. In the end, I just put my phone down, turned off the lights, and went to bed without replying. The silence, I decided, was the most powerful response I could give. This morning, I woke up to a nightmare. He hadn't given up. 5 more messages had come in overnight, each one more desperate and pathetic than the last. They were a timeline of his unraveling, from pleading, to angry, to self-pitying. The final one, sent just minutes before my alarm went off, made my blood run cold. It just said, "I'm parked outside your building. Please come down." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I crept out of bed and went to the living room window, the one that overlooked the street. I peeked through a tiny crack in the blinds. And sure enough, there it was. His sleek, white Audi, the ultimate symbol of his family's wealth and his own unearned privilege, was parked in one of the visitor spots. It looked completely out of place on my normal, middle-class street. He was just sitting in there, a lone silhouette in the driver's seat, looking up at my building. What do you do? What do you do when the ghost of your past, the architect of your greatest pain, shows up on your doorstep, begging to be let in? Part of me wanted to call the police. Part of me wanted to march down there and scream at him to leave me alone. And a small, petty part of me, the part I'm not proud of, wanted him to feel exactly what I felt that day at his parents' house, helpless, abandoned, and completely, utterly alone. I stood there, hidden behind my blinds, looking down at his car. My hand was shaking. And 1,000 different emotions were at war inside me. One part of me wanted to ignore him, to let him sit out there forever. Another part, the fixer in me I guess, was strangely curious. And a small, dark part of me, the part that was born in the fire of that awful day, wanted him to feel every ounce of the humiliation that I had felt. If you're still listening, please do me a favor and like this video, and comment with the number 1 down below. It lets me know you've given me a like, and it tells me that you're with me on this journey. Your support is an incredible encouragement for me to keep going. Please, comment with the number 1 and listen to the rest of my story. It's been exactly 6 months since that lovely birthday surprise. 6 months to the day since my life as I knew it was detonated. A lot can change in 6 months. I moved out of that little month-to-month rental and, 2 months ago, I used my share of the money from the old apartment to make a down payment on an actual house. It's nothing fancy, just a small 2-bedroom bungalow with a little yard and a detached garage that I've converted into the workshop of my dreams. But it's mine. The divorce was finalized, with surprisingly little drama in the end. Matilda's lawyers folded like a cheap suit once Reggie made it clear that the contents of the work presentation folder were non-negotiable. My little furniture hobby is now my full-time job. I'm paying my own mortgage. Life is good. Unexpectedly, wonderfully good. So, last Thursday night, I was having a pretty normal evening. I'd ordered a pizza and was curled up on the couch. I'd restored myself, binging some new historical drama on Netflix. It was quiet. It was peaceful. Around 11:30 p.m., my Ring doorbell notification went off on my phone. I checked the camera, expecting it to be a raccoon trying to get into the trash again, or maybe a drunk neighbor who'd mistaken my house for theirs. Instead, I saw Preston's white Audi parked across the street. Just sitting there, lights off, like a predator in the dark. At first, I thought maybe he was dropping someone off in the neighborhood. But the car didn't move. An hour went by. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the show, but my stomach was in knots. I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep, knowing he was just out there. Waiting. Staring at my house. Around 1 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I checked the camera again on my phone. He was still there. That's when my phone started blowing up. The texts came in a rapid-fire succession. Beverly, please. I know you're home. I can see your lights. I just need 5 minutes. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I even called your friend Sarah. She hung up on me. Please answer. I've made a horrible, unforgivable mistake. And then the kicker. The one that actually made me throw back the covers and get out of bed. I've been sleeping in my car for 2 days. I have nowhere else to go. I went to my bedroom window, which faced the street, and peeked through the blinds. And sure enough, I could see his silhouette, reclined in the driver's seat of his Audi. The same car his mommy and daddy had bought him for his 25th birthday, the one he once told me was entry-level, even though it cost more than my entire college education and my first 2 years of salary combined. Part of me, the petty part that still burned with the memory of that humiliation, wanted to close the blinds, turn off the lights, and let him enjoy his luxury car camping experience. But, despite everything, I'm not a monster. I'm not them. I pulled on a sweatshirt and some sweatpants, slipped on my shoes, and went outside. The night air was cold. The look on his face when I tapped on the driver's side window was rough. He jumped, startled, then his face crumpled with a desperate kind of relief. His hair was greasy and unwashed, his face was pale, and he was wearing a wrinkled designer shirt that looked like it had been slept in for a week. He scrambled to unlock the door, almost falling out of the car in his rush to talk to me. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't booze. It was that stale, fast food and unwashed laundry and pure desperation smell you get from living in your car. The second thing I noticed was that he'd lost a lot of weight. He had always been thin, but now he looked gaunt, haunted. He started rambling immediately, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a half-crying, half-talking torrent. It took me a minute to piece together the whole pathetic story. Apparently, Caleb, the affair guy, wasn't just sleeping with him for his charm. He was an industrial spy. He had been funneling information about Matilda's business, her clients, her finances, to her biggest competitor for months. Once Matilda found out, she fired Caleb on the spot. Caleb, having gotten everything he wanted, promptly dumped Preston and disappeared, taking a whole lot of confidential company data with him. But it gets so much better. Preston, in his infinite wisdom, blinded by what he thought was love, had been actively helping Caleb. He had been covering for him at work, altering reports, fudging numbers to make Caleb look better. When the whole scheme came to light, when Matilda realized her own son had been complicit in the betrayal, she finally had enough. She cut him off. Completely. No more job at the family business. No more access to the trust fund. No more paid-for apartment. He'd been couch surfing with friends for weeks, but he had burned through everyone's goodwill. Which is how he ended up sleeping in his car outside my house, his absolute last resort. Why didn't you go to your parents' mansion? I couldn't help but ask. It's big enough. That's when he dropped the final bomb, the cherry on top of this magnificent karmic sundae. Matilda's business was under federal investigation for the shady financial dealings and tax fraud that Caleb had exposed on his way out the door. Turns out Mrs. High and Mighty, the pillar of the community, had been cooking the books for years. Their assets were frozen pending the investigation. They'd had to downsize. Dramatically. They were on the verge of losing everything. The karmic justice was so perfect, so absolute, it was almost poetic. I looked at this broken man shivering in the street, and I sighed. Get inside, Preston, I said. It's cold out here. I invited him inside. Not because I was considering taking him back. Not for a single second. But because it was 40 degrees outside, and I didn't need a hypothermic ex-husband on my conscience. That was a legal headache I didn't need. He walked into my little house, and the warmth and the light seemed to overwhelm him. He immediately started crying again, this time about how nice my place looked. It's so cozy, he sobbed. It's just a normal house, with normal furniture, some of which I'd restored myself with my own two hands. But I guess compared to living in an Audi, it looked like the Ritz-Carlton. We sat at my small kitchen table, the one I'd found at a flea market for $20 and spent a week restoring. I made him a cup of coffee while the whole sordid, pathetic story came pouring out. He told me how his mother had pressured him into the divorce, convincing him he could trade up to someone more suitable while taking half of my assets. How they'd planned the whole birthday ambush as a way to humiliate and shock me so I'd sign the papers quickly without a fight. How he'd realized within weeks that he'd made a terrible, terrible mistake, but his pride, and his mother's constant influence, kept him from admitting it. He actually looked me in the eyes, his own swimming with tears, and said the most delusional thing I have ever heard. I thought you'd fight for me. That's when I laughed. I couldn't help it. It wasn't a mean laugh, not really. It was a laugh born of pure, unadulterated absurdity. Fight for you? I asked, my voice incredulous. Preston, you publicly humiliated me. You told me I was a disappointment. You served me divorce papers on my birthday while your mother popped champagne. What exactly was I supposed to be fighting for? What do you want from me now, Preston? I asked him, my voice flat. What is the point of you being here? More tears. Then he laid it all out. He wanted to try again. He'd learned his lesson. He'd grown as a person in the last 6 months. He had nowhere to go, no money, no job prospects. His expensive degree was useless without his mommy's connections. He thought, maybe he could move in with me. Just for a little while. He could sleep on the couch. While we figured things out. I let him finish his whole pathetic pitch. I let him cry it all out. Then I did something that surprised even me. I thanked him. Thank you, he whispered, his tear-streaked face a mask of utter confusion. Yes, I said, and my voice was clearer and stronger than it had ever been. I want to thank you. Thank you for the divorce. Thank you for showing me exactly who you and your family truly are. Thank you for forcing me to build a life for myself, on my own terms. The last 6 months have been the hardest of my life, but they've also been the most liberating. For the first time since I met you, I'm making choices based on what I want, not what would please you or impress your mother. You didn't just set me free, Preston. You gave me back to myself. So, thank you. He just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Then came the bargaining. He'd do anything. He'd change. He'd go to therapy. He never appreciated what he had, how good I was to him. I held up a hand to stop him. You can crash on my couch for one night, Preston. Just one. Because it's late, and I'm not going to send anyone out to sleep in their car in the middle of the night. But in the morning, you need to call your brother Arthur, and you need to figure out your next steps. Steps that do not, under any circumstances, involve me. The look of utter shock on his face was almost comical. I don't think Preston had ever been told no so definitively in his entire privileged life. The next morning, I was up early. I made a pot of coffee and some toast. Because that's what decent humans do. The same woman who laughed in my face as my marriage ended was now practically begging for my help to save her from ruin. Preston looked at me, his eyes wide with a strange, pathetic mix of hope and embarrassment. He was actually considering it. I took a deep breath. Tell your mother I'm not interested in any business arrangements with her, I said, my voice calm but as hard as steel. But I know someone who might be able to help. I scribbled a name and number on a napkin and pushed it across the table. It was the contact information for Walter, a brilliant business consultant I'd recently met who specialized in reputation management and crisis control for struggling companies. Tell her to call him. He's the best, but he's not cheap. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the phone. Then Matilda, her voice barely a whisper, asked for the contact information. I listened as Preston related to her. He ended the call and looked at me. The final, dawning realization was spreading across his face. Not only was I not taking him back, but I had moved on so completely, so successfully, that I was now in a position to offer his family a professional lifeline that had absolutely nothing to do with me emotionally. I was no longer a player in their game. I was a spectator. He left an hour later. Arthur had agreed to let him stay for a while. As he was leaving, a backpack of his essentials slung over his shoulder, he turned at my front door. Will you ever forgive me? He asked, his voice small, the voice of a little boy. I already have, I told him. And the surprising thing was, I meant it. Not for your sake, Preston. For mine. Holding on to all that anger was exhausting. And I have furniture to refinish. And a dog to adopt. Speaking of which, meet Max. I adopted him from a local shelter last weekend. He lost a leg in an accident, but he doesn't let it slow him down one bit. He drools on my couch and steals my socks, and he is, without a doubt, the best decision I've made in years. So that's the end of the Preston saga. 6 months. From a champagne-fueled party celebrating my devastation to him sleeping in his car outside my house, begging for scraps of my pity. Life comes at you fast, doesn't it? I don't know what will happen to him, or to his family. Honestly, I don't really care. I hope he figures his life out. I hope they learn something from all of this, maybe a little humility. But mostly, I'm just looking forward to my own future. To traveling without worrying about whether the hotel is 5-star. To making beautiful furniture without being told it's an embarrassing little hobby. To building a life that is authentically, unapologetically mine. For those of you who followed this whole crazy story from the beginning, thank you. Thank you for the support, for the advice, and for just being here to listen. It helped more than you will ever know. Now I want to ask you all something. Have you ever come out on the other side of a nightmare, a betrayal, a loss so profound you thought you'd never recover, only to realize it was actually the best thing that ever happened to you? Let me know your story in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And if you haven't already, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories. Take care of yourselves, and remember how strong you are.